Welcome to this webinar co-hosted by the Ministry of Finance and the Better Than Cash Alliance on success factors in tax digitalization, featuring Indonesia's experience and leadership. Selamat pagi, everyone. My name is Kesom Masali, and I am the Asia Pacific lead at the Better Than Cash Alliance. We are all certainly living in very unusual times when governments around the world are facing acute pressure on their national budgets. Yet, with massive new public spending to protect their populations and economies, the value of digitalization has never been greater. So we are very pleased to have this opportunity to discuss together important findings on the digitalization of tax systems and emerging economies, including Indonesia. At the Better Than Cash Alliance, we embarked on this global research last year in response to many of our members identifying the person to government payment digitization as a top priority. This work would not have been possible without the strong collaboration with colleagues, in particular at the Directorate General Pajak, as well as the Fiscal Policy Agency. We are very grateful for this tremendous contribution to this study. The discussion today will focus on tax digitalization strategies and trajectories of Indonesia, as well as other important economies such as Mexico and Rwanda, and draw on their experiences as part of peer learning and sharing among the Alliance members. Secondly, determine the success factors in the digitalization and integration of tax filing and payment, drawing largely on the tremendous work and leadership that's already happening in Indonesia. And lastly, we will take a deep dive into Indonesia's own journey, recognizing your progress, the leadership, and the important next steps. The audience today is a select group of colleagues who have a specialized focus on tax, and we're also keen to leverage the expertise of all attendees to discuss how the key recommendations for the Indonesia context can be taken forward by the collective action of relevant tax stakeholders, which include, of course, the government and its leadership, the private sector, and the development partners in Indonesia. So as we start the learning session, please do continue to share your expertise and questions to the Q&A box of the Zoom room. And I'd like to now begin by introducing our esteemed speakers. First, a very warm welcome to Pak Fabrio Nathan. Pak Fabrio was appointed the head of Fiscal Policy Agency at the Ministry of Finance in April this year and oversees all matters relating to fiscal policy, as well as international economic and financial cooperation. We are thrilled to have him here. Secondly, I would like to introduce Pak Suryo, who oversees key ongoing tax reforms, and notably in the context of today's discussion, the important exercise of procurement of the country's core tax system. A very warm welcome, Pak Suryo. And lastly, we're thrilled to have Professor J. Rosengard, the adjunct professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and the main author of this research. As you all know, he's a global tax expert with more than 40 years of international experience designing, implementing, and evaluating development policies in public finance and fiscal strategy, tax and budget reform. We're very pleased and grateful for his presence and time here today. I will be moderating the session for the first hour of our webinar today. And therefore, again, a warm welcome to everyone. And as we start, a quick look at our agenda today. First, we will have the opening address by Pak Fabrio. Secondly, Pak Suryo will give us a brief overview of tax administration reform and the DGT business direction as we move forward. Then I will come in and share a brief overview of the context and objectives of this research. Following that, we will have Professor Rosengard, who will present the key findings of the global research with a brief discussion on COVID-19's impact on tax policy and administration. The second half of our webinar today will zoom into Indonesia and your tremendous leadership and the next steps, and we'll conclude with another question and answer discussion session that will be moderated by my colleague Iswari, the Southeast Asia Pacific lead at the Better Than Cash Alliance. With this, may I invite Pak Fabrio to make his opening address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Jakarta, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Better Than Cash Alliance, especially Professor J. Rosengard from Harvard Kennedy School for conducting this study on tax digitalization and arranging this discussion for dissemination of the study. I also highly appreciate Digitax, Pak Suryo and team. Digitax is the source of the case study in this discussion, their trajectory and reforms of policies and leadership in the past years. I would also extend my appreciation to all participants joining this event. Before the speaker deliver the presentations, allow me to give a short introduction to give you a context on what we are currently facing right now. Please allow me to give perspective on tax digitalization in Indonesia. In the last 10 years, until 2019, Indonesia's economy has grown at, on average, annual rate of 5.5%. The country's size and labor force are expected to help maintain this trend. A key feature of Indonesia's growth has been the expansion of the service sector, especially information and communications technology sector. This year, COVID-19 has become the major problem of all countries in the world. It denied every expectation of economic growth that previously predicted. In the second quarter of 2020, almost every developed and developing countries barely had any positive growth. Indonesia also experienced negative growth in the second quarter. Right now, the government really focuses on National Economic Recovery Program, or simply called PEN. It is a comprehensive program to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 to the economy with a huge amount of commitment. These are what I would call extraordinary and unprecedented policies. The policies has been focusing on three aspects: protect health and lives, manage purchasing power of people, particularly the poor and the vulnerable groups, support business sectors and help them to survive, and avoid further impact, such as bankruptcy and insolvency. Together with the central bank and other authorities, the government have used an integrated policy mix to help create buffer to avoid deeper economic downturn. Despite robust economic growth before the pandemic, Indonesia faces significant development challenges. The size of the informal economy in Indonesia is relatively large, where most of enterprises still operate in the informal sector. Moreover, Indonesia has relatively low tax to GDP ratio, so that's the reason, one of the big reasons. Indonesia's relatively low tax to GDP ratio is largely attributable to several problems, specifically high informal sector economy, resulting in a narrow tax base, generous tax incentives and exemptions, and low tax compliance. These are several factors which are causing the low tax to GDP ratio we've been experiencing in the past years. Tax policy reform has been the agenda of the Indonesian government to improve the tax ratio. In medium term, tax reform to support economic growth will be done by evaluating current tax expenditure to be more selective in providing tax incentives and reducing unfair tax. Then the strategy to increase tax revenue covers tax-based expansion, expand the number of new taxpayers, with the focus of taxpayers who are paying the tax, improving the tax compliance, promoting effective monitoring, and improve the fairness of law enforcement, and improving tax administration. In spite of the drawbacks of this pandemic, of all of the challenges, the working from home scheme and mobility restrictions have shown us the importance of digital system. While we count on the online meeting in doing our daily work, like what we're doing right now, and increasing the trend of online shopping, we realized that the tax digitalization is getting much more important and urgent. This fact supports that digitalization in tax system will play a more important role to improve the tax system, overcome the administrative burden, which would then increase the tax revenue. At the Ministry of Finance level, we implement bureaucracy reform and organizational transformation program, which includes the initiative strategy of digitalization. There are 4 themes and 15 initiatives in 2020 to be implemented. One of the themes is on revenue. This theme revenue covers the program of Unified Revenue Account Management, Joint Program of Revenue Optimization, and Core Tax System. Over the past 2 decades, Indonesia has been working to modernize its tax system. These efforts have aimed to deliver benefits for both Indonesian taxpayers and government authorities administering the tax system at all levels. Crucially, this includes increased revenue collection that can be used to help advance the Sustainable Development Goals, supporting Indonesia's people, prosperity, and environment. From this study of Better Than Cash Alliance, I think we can learn a lot for Indonesia tax digitalization experience, DigiTax experience of actively managing changes and investing in people, leveraging Indonesia's growing digital ecosystem, and aligning stakeholders to enable an effective procurement process are lessons learned which are beneficial to all of us for the future development of tax system. Of course, as in all countries, there remains much work ahead to ensure the benefits of digitalization to be fully realized. This is particularly the case of Indonesia when we implement the new core tax system in the period immediately ahead and continues to explore new digitalization measures in the future. In this very good occasion, I hope we can have a good discussion about the tax digitalization strategies and tax digitalization trajectories of Indonesia, Mexico, and Rwanda, and draw on their experience, determine the success factors in digitization and the integration of the tax filing and payment, and highlight good practices for the adoption and scaling up of digitalization tax payments in emerging economies like Indonesia, and leverage the expertise of the audience to discuss how the key recommendations for Indonesian context can be prioritized and taken forward by the collective action of the key tax stakeholders. These include government, the private sector, and development partners in Indonesia in order to help policymakers harnessing the full potential of digitalization. This is why we would also like to hear everyone's opinion in this matter. We are looking forward to hearing anyone's feedback or another lesson learned from other countries' experience. We would be really happy to hear that. So that's all from me. I hope this forum can lead to a fruitful discussion. Thank you. Happy discussion.
Thank you very much, Pak Fabrio, for highlighting the urgency of tax digitalization and also with sharing with us the tremendous insights of the government's leadership working in collaboration with all stakeholders on this agenda to really advance the Sustainable Development Goals. With this, I'd like to again thank you, Pak Fabrio, and now request Pak Suryo, Director General of Directorate General Pajak, to make his remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Madok. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to all of you in this particular morning session. At the Fiscal Policy Agency, Pak Fabrio, how are you doing today? Really good, I think. Minister of Finance, expert staff, we have Pak Nufran Sabira Sakti here, and also Pak Tarto, special staff of Minister of Finance, Pak Bobby, special staff member of the Minister of Finance, Pak Justinus, Asia Pacific PTCA Miss K. Zoom ngadop Professor Joy Rosengard, speakers, participant, organizing committee, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Directorate General of Taxes, I would like to express our appreciation for your research initiative on tax digitalization. I'm also very grateful that DGT received the opportunity to be part of this initiative. DGT has initiated a reform agenda to improve and enhance tax administration. It is aimed to increase public trust by building a strong, credible, accountable institution. In order to achieve such an objective, based on the Presidential Decree number 40, year 2018, DGT will modernize its tax administration system. A modernized tax administration system is pursued by strengthening the 5 pillars of the institutions, namely organization, human resources, business processes, technology and database, and also regulations. One of the initiatives to modernize the tax administration system is the implementation of a new core tax system, along with its supporting system. The new core tax system is expected to be in a form of a commercial off-the-shelf, or we can spell it COTS, tax administration system, equipped with proven emerging technology in tax administrations, such as data analytics, compliant risk management, integrated case management, and automated and digitalized process and services. Ladies and gentlemen, as a vital component in the tax reform program, the implementation of a new core tax administration system is beyond IT system development. To achieve the optimal outcomes, it also required provision of various aspects, such as business processes redesign, supporting regulation, and sufficient human resources. In 2018, DGT has completed the preliminary stage of core tax administration system development, which resulted in 21 high-level business processes operating model. Currently, we are undergoing the advanced preparation in detailing the operating models into a functional design document which serve as a reference in the system development. At this stage, we also consider that it is necessary to assemble the high-level business process directions and expectation from top management to construct the to-be business process and the system organization. Our business process directions are, the first one is streamlined process. We would like to develop a simple, effective, and efficient business process development through streamlining and shortening of the processes. And we expect to utilize technology to eliminate duplication and unnecessary processes without reducing the work quality. Second one is customer-centric approach based off user experience. What we mean by customer-centric here is the term of taxpayers and users in general. We design and develop business processes by taking user experience into account to increase accessibility for users. And the third one is open and integrated system. Core tax system should integrate all business processes into one information system environment and create interconnection with other surrounding systems. The fourth business direction is data and knowledge driven. We would like to optimize data and information usage in providing services and completing processes by utilizing business intelligence and knowledge management. We will also ensure that the usage of production of good data quality for the purpose of accurate and credible analysis and reporting in order to meet internal and external needs. The fifth one is digitized and automated process. Business process development is also aimed to support digitalization to ensure smooth and automation process. The sixth one is enterprise-wide integrated view of taxpayer. We expect to develop one centralized system which consists of comprehensive taxpayer information. By having this, analysis and supervisions are expected to be more comprehensive and reliable. The seventh one is prudent and accountable. We will develop reliable processes organized with precautionary principles and secured with clear segregation of duties and adequate authentication. It is also a big part of internal control system. And the eighth one is risk-based compliant approach. We will utilize risk-based approach in handling taxpayer. We have actually been doing this by using compliant risks management approach and expect that it may be further developed. The ninth one is omni-channel and borderless services. We will optimize service channels by adding more access channels in providing services. We are now in the process of developing click, call, and counter feature in providing our services to taxpayers. And the last one is centralized capabilities in the center of excellence. We plan to optimize the utilization of key skills to deliver excellent services. We are thinking of facilitating new roles and enhancing existing ones through technology-enabled change. The business directions I have mentioned will be the guideline for the system design and will provide the foundation in the development of to-be business processes will be implemented in the new Cortex system. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the extensive effort and the time DGT has spent in reforming Indonesian tax administration, we realize that our journey has just begun. There are plenty of works needed to be done and significant improvement to be acquired. DGT is open to any insight and constructive advices from the tax researchers and the academics, as those will be valuable for DGTP better and better, and also for Indonesian better. That's probably my remarks, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I hope all of the participants here have a very good discussion, and we can get the fruitful result of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Suryo, for giving us a strategic overview and also for setting the context and the stage for today's discussion, which is really to further tax digitalization and enable the government of Indonesia as well as the people of Indonesia to really reap the benefits of digitalization as part of Indonesia's aspirations in the digital economy. I would like to start with a very quick introduction to the Better Than Cash Alliance. The Better Than Cash Alliance is a UN-based partnership of governments, companies, and international organizations that together accelerate the transition from cash to digital payments to reduce poverty and drive inclusive growth. The mission is to catalyze a global movement from cash to digital payments to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, an important agenda that Pak Fabrio has also highlighted. The Alliance has 75 members, including national governments from Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, as well as prominent global companies and international organizations that have together committed to digitizing payments. We are privileged that the government of Indonesia became an official member of the Better Than Cash Alliance in June 2017, and we are humbled and grateful to be of service to a range of government departments, including the Indonesian delegation at the G20, given our role as implementing partners to the G20's Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion. As we have heard from Pak Fabrio and Pak Suryo, domestic resource mobilization was raised as a key development priority for many of our government members, and that led to us prioritizing this important agenda as part of our global research with our membership. In line with our core focus on digital payments at the Alliance, it also corresponds to a key payment use case, the taxes people and businesses pay to government. Digitalization makes it easier for tax authorities to levy and collect taxes, and for individuals and businesses to pay them, among many other benefits such as cost savings and financial inclusion. A key finding of this report that you will hear more about today is that in emerging markets, digitalizing tax payments and related processes can raise an additional $300 billion in government revenues annually. This represents almost 1/3 of the $1 trillion funding gap, which, if closed, helps achieve the roadmap for people, prosperity, and planet to the Sustainable Development Goals. So with this, we know that digitalizing tax systems is a proven solution and is now needed more than ever in the post-COVID world. However, as we have also heard from Pak Suryo, implementing a digital tax program is not easy, and governments considering it would benefit greatly from a robust study of what digitalization initiatives have worked in other emerging markets and the practical steps they've taken to make it happen. This is where today's discussion comes in. We hope that through this research, it can serve as a practical guide to take stock of the current successes, to successfully implement a digital tax program that works for the people of Indonesia. And with this, I have the great privilege of handing it over to Professor J. Rosengard for his presentation. Thank you, Professor.
Oke, selamat pagi Bapak-bapak, Ibu-ibu sekalian.
Selamat pagi.
Pak Suryo, yes. Oke. Saya senang sekali sempat bergabung dengan keluarga besar Kemenkeu lagi, tetapi minta maaf sebesar-besarnya kalau saya agak telmi, karena di sini di Boston sudah jam 10 malam kemarin. Don't worry, my dear colleagues at Better Than Cash Alliance, I will not do my entire presentation in Indonesian, just some friendly preliminary chit-chat before we begin. So next slide, please. What I'd like to do is to start by placing tax digitalization in the context of COVID-19, which is a top priority for certainly the Ministry of Finance. Tax digitalization already had many synergies with tax policy and tax administration before the pandemic, but COVID-19 has amplified these synergies and encouraged policymakers to accelerate implementation of tax system digitalization. So this slide summarizes fiscal policy responses to COVID-19 around the world, including Indonesia. And then the next slide will summarize global administrative tools to implement these fiscal policy responses, including tax system digitalization. So current top fiscal priorities around the world are, number one, to support the health sector to combat the cause of economic distress. You can't save livelihoods, of course, unless you save lives. Second objective or priority is immediate relief to the most vulnerable workers directly or via their families and employers. Third fiscal priority is to structure immediate liquidity, solvency, and income support to facilitate a faster, smoother, and incremental recovery. But it's important to keep in mind that before a country is well on the road to recovery, a conventional fiscal stimulus package is counterproductive, since now the binding constraint is limited supply. So the net effect would probably be stagflation, that is, inflation without growth or stagnation. And conventional tax incentives now are ineffective if the business is already losing money, so it doesn't have any tax liabilities. And we'll come back to this a little bit later to see what kind of tax measures can be taken to help mitigate the worst impacts of the pandemic. To implement these top fiscal priorities, the most popular current fiscal tools are to increase the coverage, magnitude and duration of unemployment insurance. And in countries like Indonesia that doesn't have unemployment insurance, they've done some creative things like the pre-employment cards. A second tool would be to try to expand social safety net programs for low-income households. So for example, in Indonesia, you have the unconditional cash transfers, bantuan langsung tunai, and the health insurance systems that are listed on the slide. And the third tool is to help small and medium enterprises, SMEs, to stay afloat and retain staff, as well as to help strategic large businesses survive and maintain their payrolls. So this is simply survival. It's basically throwing a life jacket. It's not to stimulate demand when you can increase production. So for example, in Indonesia, we've seen in the pandemic fiscal response, SME credit restructuring and new financing for SMEs, and reduction of state-owned enterprise capital injections into the state budget. When you look at the current role of tax policy, to be a little bit more specific, for households, it means things like tax filing extensions, deferment of tax or employee Social Security contribution payments, wage subsidies, extended or enhanced unemployment benefits. Again, the focus on household liquidity to stay afloat. Businesses, it's similar. It's liquidity and solvency, tax filing extensions, deferral of tax or employer Social Security contribution payments, advanced tax payments based on the current year rather than past year tax liabilities, given the different economic environment, more flexible tax debt repayment plans, and enhanced tax refunds, especially the value-added tax. For a longer list with many examples, I provided an OECD link from other countries. Next. So then, if we want to look at tax administration to implement these policy priorities, the first two priorities for administration have not changed from pre-pandemic priorities. Number one, to enhance tax authority cost effectiveness by improving administrative efficiency and operational productivity. Number two, to reduce taxpayer financial and non-financial voluntary compliance costs, improve taxpayer trust and confidence through greater transparency and accountability. These have not changed, but have become even more important. But we have a third priority now, which is to maximize touchless or digital interactions to minimize in-person contact because of public health concerns. So it's an added benefit of digitalization. The most popular administrative tools related to tax digitalization in general are fiscal and financial business and household incentives. For example, reduced fees and taxes, expedited processing of returns, payments, refunds, subsidized point-of-sale terminals or tax software, lotteries, and so on. Number two, enabling regulations like ceilings on cash transactions, mandated or required use or acceptance of electronic commerce, salary wage payments, mandated electronic tax enrollment and tax filing, and mandated cash register or point-of-sale terminals. Some other tools, government adoption of government to people tax or social safety net payments. So for example, paying the unconditional cash transfers electronically rather than in cash, and of course, public awareness campaigns. Some good examples from Latin America related to digital tax payments are from Chile and Argentina. And again, I provide another link with a lot more examples from different countries that might be adapted to Indonesia. Next. I think this slide was covered very, very well by Kaysom earlier about the value of digitalization for governments. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm not going to explain what tax digitalization is. This audience fully understands it better than anybody, but it's really been pushed by some global trends, the renewed focus on resource mobilization, especially to close fiscal gaps, to provide a little bit more discretionary spending or fiscal space, the use of big data, the rise of the digital economy and digital governance, and the increase in digital literacy and connectivity have all been global trends that have enabled this focus on digitalization. The impact, again, we heard that number, the $300 billion in government revenues annually, additional, and some of the benefits that accrue to governments by digitalizing their tax systems, higher revenue from increased tax compliance. And we're talking about voluntary tax compliance, lower administrative costs through automation, more transparency and accountability, leading to reduced leakage and corruption, better data for more effective decision-making, and a broader tax base from greater business formalization. The broader the base, the lower the rates for equivalent revenue. So these are all very important benefits. This slide presents the benefits, but in a slightly different way by looking at the key stakeholders, government, business, and individuals. So if you look at government, the main value proposition is increased revenues at a lower administrative cost, which means increased net revenue after your administrative costs, including enforcement. Challenges, a lot of implementation challenges. This audience knows better than most what they are. Low initial uptake and security and privacy risks if the government misuses household or business data, or you have third-party hacking. From the business perspective, the value proposition is lower tax compliance burden, basically making it cheaper and easier to do the right thing. But some of the challenges are increased burden with more information demanded. If governments aren't selective in what they ask, this is an unreasonable burden on compliance. You have a learning curve, a cost of adaptation and learning, and again, the security and privacy risks. From the individual perspective, the main value proposition is similar to businesses. Lower tax compliance burden, again, making it cheaper and easier to comply voluntarily. But you have, again, some challenges, more rigid payment deadlines, which might be automatically enforced, less flexibility here for extenuating circumstances, risk of unfair tax system for those without digital access. So you have the problem of increasing the digital divide. Indonesia, this would be mainly with rural areas and in areas off Java and Bali. Next. So we have identified 10 success factors based on our research across emerging markets. And they're really in three basic groups. The first is an enabling environment. That is, administrations must understand the context in which they are operating when setting out their strategy. That's the institutional context, the regulatory context, and the payment ecosystem, which will differ between countries and within one country over time. The second area is having a specific, lasting, and energetic vision and desire for transformation by senior officials. That's the vision and strategy. And to implement that vision and strategy, you have to recognize this is really not technology-led. It's policy-led, and people, processes, planning, communication are all critical for successful implementation. We heard some of that early from both Pak Febrio and Pak Suryo. And then some underlying core principles, the idea of user centricity, collaboration, especially with the private sector and the community, and data-driven decision-making. Next. These are the same factors with more detail. This will be posted for you to study at leisure. Next slide. So 2 slides from each of the cases that are not Indonesia. This first one is from Rwanda. And for those of you not familiar with Rwanda, it's a landlocked country in East Central Africa. The population is about 9 million, which could be a Kabupaten or 2 in Java. But they've had robust annual growth rates of about 7.5% annually, real growth rate before the pandemic. And a core aim of the Rwandan government is to reduce aid dependency by developing effective strategies to expand the tax base. I should mention that Rwanda is a low-income country, unlike Indonesia, but I think there are a lot of lessons that could be adapted from a small, landlocked, poor country to Indonesia with quite different characteristics. Some of the challenges should sound familiar to Indonesia. We heard it earlier. A highly informal economy, relatively narrow tax base, low tax compliance culture, and the added challenge and complexity of taxing multinational digital companies operating in the country. And I know that Indonesia has just recently introduced some new legislation to try to address this issue of taxing digital companies whose main assets are intangibles, but they're making lots of money in the country. And I think in Indonesia, it's really focused on the value-added tax in this context. And the little graph, the lower right-hand corner, just shows some of the benchmarks on Rwanda's digitalization tax journey. Next slide. So some of the key insights from Rwanda, the importance of leveraging strong government support. And this is over time, despite changes perhaps in political leadership, collaborating privately with the private sector, and being agile. We talked about the core tax system in Indonesia, but technology changes, circumstances changes, and you have to be able to adapt to the changes. Some of the impacts have been pretty remarkable in Rwanda. They doubled the number of registered taxpayers from 2011 to 2018. They decreased the cost of collection from 3.5% of total revenue to 2.7%, by introducing electronic billing machines, EBMs. They've been able to reduce false VAT claims by between 25 and 35% since 2013, and they've been able to reduce the time to file VAT returns from 45 hours down to 5 hours. Some of the recommendations, based on their experience, the importance of looking at this as total change of administration and policy, not just a technical issue. So strengthening organizational capacity by recruiting, training, and retaining top digital talent, which is often difficult when competing with the private sector. Using data insights to increase collection and compliance, and increasing investment in simplifying tax services for small and micro businesses. Next slide. So again, a couple of slides from Mexico. Mexico, in many ways, is much more similar to Indonesia than Rwanda. It's the 15th largest economy with an economy of about 1.2 trillion US dollars. I believe Indonesia is the largest with about a $1 trillion economy. Mexico, like Indonesia, is an upper middle income country. Congratulations, Indonesia, you've just been reclassified from lower middle income to upper middle income. So, and again, like Indonesia, it's a large population, about 100 million people, and it's quite diverse. Different languages, different ethnicities, different cultures around Mexico. Some of their top tax challenges should also sound familiar to Indonesia. A substantial size of the informal economy, low compliance culture, and a lot of administrative barriers and red tape. In Mexico, their Dichen Pajak is something called SAT, S-A-T. It's a semi-autonomous body, a little bit like the United States Internal Revenue Service. And they're probably one of the most advanced tax authorities in terms of tax digitalization in the world. Their tax to GDP rate has risen 3.6 percentage points to about 16%. I should have mentioned Rwanda's tax to GDP ratio is around 17%. So Mexico 16%, Rwanda closer to 17%. We all know in Indonesia, it's been declining before the pandemic, and it's now around 10 or 11%, depending how you count. This little graph again shows some of the milestones along Mexico's journey in tax digitalization. Next. So some of the key insights from Mexico. Again, the need to have a compelling vision and strategy that is consistent over time, in their case, despite the changes in the presidency. The importance of securing flexible long-term financing to ensure that the reform effort is sustainable, and using data in a wise way to continuously improve internal operations and customer-facing services. The impact, again, has been pretty remarkable in Mexico. They've increased tax revenue. They've almost doubled tax revenue over the last decade. At the same time, between 2012 and 2016, tax evasion has decreased by about 20%. The tax base has increased by 150% over the last decade. SAT has decreased the cost of collection by about 57% since 2006. And there has been an 11% decrease in the average auditing cost. It's important that they have these numbers. They have been very vigilant in trying to establish a baseline and then try to track changes over time, and where possible, attribute the cause, although often tax digitalization is part of a greater effort in policy and tax reform, administrative reform, like in Indonesia. Three of the recommendations: the promotion of an inclusive digital payments ecosystem beyond the tax system, which is quite robust, actually, quite robust in Indonesia. Simplifying tax processes to enable seamless digital taxpayer service. And something that might resonate in Indonesia under decentralization, the importance of collaborating with subnational levels of government. I believe that is the last slide in my session, and I've tried to leave about 10 minutes for any kind of questions or comments from our esteemed.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's certainly very insightful, and I know that in the next session we'll do a deep dive on Indonesia, where many of our experts on the line are part of that success and the next journey that's coming up. I'd like to request participants to please send your questions through the chat box. And perhaps, Professor, I can start off already with the 1 or 2 questions that have come in to us. The first question, Professor, is that, given Mexico's remarkable successes, what would you say are the top 3 reasons for their ability to increase tax revenues?
Yeah, my friends in Indonesia never ask me easy questions. Okay, so it's a great question, and the key in Mexico is that it's part of a comprehensive tax reform effort. It wasn't just digitalization or technology led. So it starts at the top with a consistent vision, strategy, and benchmarks, clear, quantifiable benchmarks for success. It's trying to integrate the tax digitalization process with overall movements in digitalization in Mexico. And I think also the tight link between policy and administration, very important. and in the administration, once the policy has been decided, to try to make it as depoliticized as possible and really focus on quality governance. Again, the tax reform policy is a political decision as much as technical, but when you get to implementation, SOT has a lot of autonomy in making administrative decisions following the legislative guidelines. So it's a complicated combination of factors, but it's all of these together, I think, that have really explained the success, the willingness to take some risk. And I should mention, Mexico has a lot of problems like Indonesia. I mean, corruption is a huge issue, the informal economy, the cash economy, these are all huge issues. I should say one key difference between Mexico and Indonesia, and one area where Indonesia has an advantage, is I think the digital ecosystem in Indonesia is more advanced than Mexico. And one of the problems in Mexico is pressure from the banks have greatly inhibited expansion of non-bank payment systems. And I think that in Indonesia is much more vibrant. So every country has advantages and disadvantages. That's a short, somewhat superficial answer to a really good question.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have a few questions from Pajak. May I request Pak Sakti to please ask your question directly from the conference room?
Thank you, Ms. Kezom. Professor J, thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to know about your presentation about the Rwanda's tax system. You mentioned about that the president has given the strong support to the RRA. So what kind of support they give it, and also how can this support can give the big impact for RRA to maintain the taxpayers' data? And also the second one is about the Mexico things. In here, Mexico can have the big, how can I say, achievement for the tax ratio from 3.6% to 16. It's quite big numbers. And what kind of key success factor for this kind of big leap from the SAT in Mexico? I mean, how can they make such a jump from the tax ratio in Mexico? Because you mentioned the condition in Mexico is most likely the same with Indonesia, right? So maybe we can learn so much from the Mexico case. Thank you.
Again, great question from my friend at Pajak. I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding. The GDP, the tax to GDP ratio did not increase from 3.6% to 16 something. That was the percentage increase. So it went from something like 13% to 16% roughly. So that's just a little bit of an interpretation issue. The difference between Rwanda and Indonesia that's important to keep in mind is that Indonesia, essentially since 1998, has been a competitive democracy, which is really messy, right? It's a lot of dialogue, consensus building, and change of president after 2-term limits and so on. I should mention Rwanda, even though the country is led by a president, it's been the same president for at least the last 2 decades. And Rwanda had the misfortune of a very, very difficult, basically civil war between ethnic groups, where a lot of people from one ethnic group were slaughtered by another. So going from this man-made disaster and relative anarchy required very strong leadership. And they've been able to rebuild the country over the last 2 decades. So, sometimes countries require strong leadership at certain points in time. And in Rwanda, that's been very helpful. But that also means the government can order certain things that would be very difficult in Indonesia. I mean, they could say that, for example, if you want a government service, you have to do it online or you don't get the service. You want a marriage license, you don't do it online, you don't get it. try that in Indonesia, I mean, or the United States, you'd have a revolution. So certain things that in a little more, bit more authoritarian democracy, you can push things through a little bit easier than you can in Indonesia. But the importance of having policy continuity. So in Mexico, you've had changes in administrations like Indonesia, and they have a one-term limit rather than 2 terms, but it's, I think, 1 term for 6 years. So they do have these political changes. They have contested elections. They have different political parties, but they've been able to keep a constant strategy which provides certainty to taxpayers, to businesses, to households, over the political changes. So both in Mexico and in Rwanda, they've separated tax policy formulation, which, as I said, is a highly political process, from tax administration. And that's a little bit like Indonesia as well, where you have BKF does policy, the US it's done in Treasury, but then administration is done by Ditjen Pajak, and in revenue by the Revenue Authority, in Mexico by SAT. So you see some similarities between those, but Rwanda being 7 million people, not what, 260 million people, you know, it's a little different. But as I said, some of the commonalities between the countries are very important. Consistency in policy, administrative autonomy once policy has been set. And that means support in terms of financing the changes, in recruiting, retaining good people, because in the end, your main resources at Pajak are people and information. Those are your resources. And so you need good data and you need to know how to use it. And so in both countries, they put a premium on human resources and smart data collection and management. And I know that's a big objective of the new core tax system, is to unify the tax bases, to clean them up, to make them reliable and more usable, and hopefully to demand less but more accurate information from taxpayers, often electronically. So again, it's a combination of things. And the reason we talked about the other 2 countries, even though we recognize the significant differences between each other and with Indonesia, we do think there's some common elements that are already being followed by Indonesia and others that might be adapted to the Indonesian context. Again, a really good question, and my apologies for being a bit brief, maybe a little superficial in answering it. But I encourage you to read the full case studies when they are published and reach out to me if you'd like further information or explanation.
Thank you, Professor. We have one last question from Pak Ivan, who will ask also directly. Pak Ivan, over to you.
Thank you, Madhup. Hello, Jai. Morning.
Hi, how you doing, Pak Iwan?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
You've got me very nervous now.
I just want to ask you just a short question. You already have experience, so many experience in many countries in transforming the digital taxation administration, right? So I just want to know from you, what are the do's and what are the don'ts if we want to transform our digital tax? So that's my short questions. Hopefully you can answer in the long answers. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's a really big question. So I'm going to look at it from the perspective of the taxpayer. Because you already know the internal issues, I think, very, very well. But often you forget the perspective of the taxpayer. And in the end, do not ask for information you do not need. Do not ask for information you already have or you can collect electronically. Electronic invoicing, for example, for VAT. You know, why collect all of these factors or receipts and so on when you already have the information? It's like if you have a credit card and you actually have to add up your own liabilities to figure out how much you owe the bank. They have the information, they tell you what you owe. You can pre-populate a lot of this. So from the perspective of the taxpayer, anything you can do, whether it's a business or a household, to make it frictionless, easy. And we're talking about also time, opportunity costs, which are often greater than the financial costs. And that will also streamline your internal administrative processes. So I would try to remember looking at this from the perspective of the taxpayer, and the foundation of your tax system has got to be voluntary compliance. You want to use your enforcement resources very strategically. And again, in the United States, almost all of it is voluntary compliance. And then when you have the ones who will not follow the rules, then you can use the law and due process to pursue those, especially where there's a lot of foregone tax revenue. So my short answer is, I know from working with you have a great understanding of how to make it work better internally, and cooperation between Pajak and other parts of the government. You know, you're trying to unify ID numbers, for example, so that you can identify the taxpayer and have a unified tax record. So for all of that, I think you guys are great. Just always keep in mind the taxpayer, and you'll be fine.
Professor Jay, this is a really important point, user centricity, and also strategically using the resources for enforcement, as you mentioned, strategic enforcement. We have one last question from our audience, Aisha. I'm not sure if she's able to unmute her mic. Aisha, if you can hear me and are able to unmute, please do ask your question directly. She's from the National Secretariat for Financial Inclusion. Over to you, Aisha.
Thanks, Gazem. Yeah, I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So I'm Aisha from the National Council for Financial Inclusion of Indonesia. The Council will host Indonesia Financial Inclusion Forum this October, and we're looking forward to extend the invitation to all of you here. Hi, Jay. Thank you for your insights. Our task at the Council is to ensure every Indonesian has access to formal financial services. Well, as you know, access to these services in terms of ownership and usage would help them, particularly unbanked, medium-sized entrepreneurs in tax payment and tax reporting. So based on your experience, what would be innovative, human-centric approaches to encourage these unbanked, medium-sized medium-sized entrepreneurs and businesses to pay their tax? Well, at least report their earnings and so forth.
Again, great question. I'm glad you asked. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart. At the Kennedy School, I'm actually the director of our financial sector program, which focuses on financial inclusion. So I think when you look at how you can use digitalization in the public sector to promote financial inclusion in the private sector, especially for these small family businesses, there are two ways. One, it normally starts with government to people payments. I mentioned benefits, especially during the pandemic, but also tax payments to the government. And the idea is that you start with payments, and then hopefully by linking them to payment channels, bank or non-bank, you can link them to the full portfolio of financial services, savings, asset accumulation, credit for household expenses or for businesses, risk management tools like insurance. So using payments as kind of a gateway or an entry point, introducing them, as I said, to, in Indonesia, you have a lot of innovative non-bank payment channels, but behind them, when you start to get stored value and electronic accounts and so on, you've got banks and bank accounts. So this is a very nice way of providing a very good immediate service to the taxpayer, but also enabling them or giving them opportunities to perhaps have access to a broader portfolio of financial services. So great question, and a nice link between one of the core objectives of Better the Cash Alliance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jay, and thank you, Aisa, and all the other participants for your excellent questions. With this, I'd like to again thank you, Professor Rosengard, for these very illuminating remarks, as well as for sharing insights from Rwanda and Mexico. We now move on to the next section of the webinar, which is the deep dive into Indonesia, where you will see a reflection of your journey, your successes, and the next steps coming forward. I now hand it over to my colleague, Iswari Sivalingam, the Southeast Asia Pacific lead at the Better Than Cash Alliance.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. My name is Iswari Sivalingam, and I'm the Southeast Asia lead at the Better Than Cash Alliance. I'll be moderating the second half of today's webinar. As Kezum said, from taking a very global view, we now zoom into Indonesia's journey. And over the past 2 decades, there's really been a lot done, particularly on modernizing Indonesia's tax system through a range of digitalization initiatives. I'll be first sharing the key insights of this journey and the impact that we have seen as been captured in the Indonesia case study of the global report. But before doing that, I would also like to introduce the other esteemed speakers in this session who will be giving us a nuanced insight into how all of this was achieved. First, I would like to introduce Ibu Mulia Dewi Karnadi. Ibu Dewi is CEO of Online Pajak and plays a key role in driving the company's mission of supporting the government on compliance of tax collection, as well as empowering every taxpayer through Online Pajak's integrated platform. We look forward to hear One is Director of ICT Transformation at Directorate General Pajak and is also a champion for the use of data and behavioral insights to ensure better compliance, reduce fraud, and to improve services for the public. We'll be hearing more about the plans of the ICT team at Pajak as we look forward to the years ahead. Following this in-depth discussion on Indonesia, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session where we will invite Professor Jay back to answer any questions. And last but not least, we have the pleasure of Ibu Oka Kusumawardani, the acting head of the Center for Revenue Policy at the Ministry of Finance, to give the closing remarks and to bring the discussion together by reiterating the role of digitization, also in the context of broader tax policy reform. Next slide, please. So as said, I'll start with a quick overview on Indonesia's tax digitalization journey, the key success factors, as well as recommendations for the work that continues. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because given the technical expertise of our audience today, you know much more about these key facts on Indonesia than I do. Pak Febrio has also shared the very important points on country context earlier as well. Just to recap, some of the key challenges that we face in Indonesia are firstly the highly informal economy. Second, there is a relatively higher threshold for income for the higher income segments, which potentially reduces tax revenues. There is also fairly low VAT compliance, which costs the economy an estimated 3% of GDP. Indonesia's tax digitalization journey has been led by Directorate General of Taxes. And since the start of this journey about 18 years ago, there has been significant investment, both in terms of infrastructure as well as process changes. The main goal has been to deliver benefits for both Indonesian taxpayers and for government authorities administering the tax system at all levels. These key steps, which are captured in this small graphic here, will be elaborated by Pak Iwan later on, who has directly led this process. So I would like to move on to discussing the impact of the work, as well as the key lessons that Indonesia has to share for the rest of the world. So I think one major achievement, in the past 2 decades is that given the continued commitment to digitalization, majority of the tax cycle is now digitalized for taxpayers. And the future work is really focused on downstream tax components, upgrading the back-end capability. And this experience really offers lessons for other countries as they embark on similar reform efforts. First, let's look at the impact. There has definitely been an increase in revenue collection. In fact, by 2017, Indonesia had more than doubled the amount of revenue collected in 2010 to 1,342 trillion Indonesian rupiah. However, we should also note that in this process, Indonesia's economy has also grown significantly. And that's probably the key reason why there has been an increase in this tax collection, as the tax to GDP ratio has fallen slightly in the same period. So digitalization has really resulted in significant benefits to taxpayers. First and foremost, there has been a significant reduction in administrative delays and improved efficiency. Notably, there has been a 20% reduction in business tax filing. This originally took approximately 12 days for a small business to complete the process. Secondly, there has been considerable improvement in user satisfaction of the service. This is measured and continuously tracked by DGT Satisfaction Index, which has risen from 3.9, just under 4 in 2011 to almost 4.3 in 2017. All of this has also been recognized globally. There has been significant improvement in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index in the paying tax category. In the last decade, Indonesia has risen 45 places from number 81 to 73 in the overall rankings. So now coming to some of the key lessons for other countries that are on a similar journey or about to embark on the same journey. Firstly, actively managing change and investing in people. What has happened at DGT is that there's been an important recognition for internal change management, and this was really made clear through the 2011 to 2018 Human Resource Management Blueprint that was launched. And in enacting this blueprint, DGT developed a new job classification system, improved training for tax officers, and implemented a more competitive compensation scheme to also retain as well as recruit highly skilled staff that are fundamentally responsible for all the efforts behind this digitalization process. And along with this, HR and change management exercise, the full benefits of digitalization can also only be reaped with parallel efforts to update the key functions and processes that have also been made. The second one is leveraging Indonesia's growing digital economy. As you may well know, Indonesia's digital sector is expected to reach a value of 1,560 trillion Indonesian rupiah. This is approximately $100 billion by 2025, and it's really a remarkable figure. This also creates a favorable environment for which taxpayers, I think would see benefits in DGT's tax digitalization efforts. And in line with this, DGT has partnered with many private sector actors to reduce, technology development costs, as well as to enable taxpayers, to access value-added services through these third-party service providers. And we'll hear more from Ibu Dewi later on. Last but not least, it's also about aligning stakeholders to enable an effective procurement process. And this is particularly relating to the core tax system that has been a tremendous effort by the Pajak team. And in the past, I think the process of procurement has suffered delays, because of narrow product specifications. But these bottlenecks, and these inefficiencies in the process have been actually well recognized by Pajak, which has shifted its approach, from support from the highest levels of government, and also decided to procure a customized technology solution. Next slide, please. So, through these digitalization initiatives, the tax system has taken great strides. But as with all countries, there remains much work ahead so that the benefits of this digitalization are fully realized. And as Pak Surya said earlier, the journey has just begun. And, this is particularly the case as Indonesia implements now its new core tax system in the coming months. And continues to explore new digitalization measures, which Pak Iwan will also talk about in his presentation. I would like to conclude here today with 5 key recommendations from our tax research. The first is really around the institutional context. As shared earlier, DGT has already made significant changes in its processes, particularly around decision making. And the lessons from the ongoing or the completed procurement process show that the benefits arise when DGT defines the desired outcomes for its various teams rather than prescribing specific activities and requirements to internal DGT teams. So the process should be collaborative. And for example, substantial benefits, could also be realized when DGT is empowered to independently define its human resource needs. So experience to date, not only in Indonesia, but other countries also show that greater autonomy enables more focused decision-making and definitely helps to speed up the implementation process. Second, on vision and strategy, it's important to articulate and build support for the long-term tax digitalization strategy, which is done in collaboration not only by Pajak, but also the Fiscal Policy Agency. And in bringing together these efforts, alignment between the various government agencies is key. And going forward, close collaboration and alignment will be essential to successfully implement the new core tax system, which is a big and really monumental project for the Pajak team. The third point is really focusing on simplifying both the policies as well as the processes, especially for post-filing procedures. The tax process in Indonesia, both internal and external, could be improved in a way which ensures that digitalization actually delivers on its full potential. For example, in order to facilitate voluntary tax compliance, tax authorities could ensure that taxpayers receive tax credits and refunds in a timely manner. So building trust, and basically giving taxpayers confidence that there is recourse, there is a way to actually solve their grievances in a hassle-free manner, will achieve greater voluntary tax compliance. Especially given that many taxes are estimates and paid in advance in the context of Indonesia. So there are a lot of reconciliation that happens based on actuals post-filing. The fourth point is on data, and I'm sure Pak Iwan will have a lot to say on this later. And I know from our consultations with Pajak that much of this is already ongoing. So it's a recommendation that's very much in process. Basically, it's important to re-emphasize data standardization to improve process flows. The digital system for taxpayer reporting of VAT was designed with different data architecture from the system for reporting personal income tax. And this has made data analysis quite challenging. So going forward, it will be important to ensure that data collected is done in a very standardized way so that maximum value can also be derived. Last but not least, and this is a great sort of point to bring and pass the discussion forward to Ibu Dewi, is for the government and for DGT to continue using these application program interfaces and continue partnership with the ASPs like Online Pajak. As mentioned, there is a growing and really tremendous potential for Indonesia's digital economy that is also tied to the digital payment ecosystem that is very vibrant in Indonesia. And there is a lot of value in using these publicly available APIs as software intermediaries. So basically what these APIs allow is to offer services at a faster rate, improvements in taxpayer experience. All of this goes towards increasing the likelihood of compliance. And as Pajak and Ibu Dewi will tell you, the process needs to be managed carefully, but there are significant advantages from promoting and enabling collaborations between the public and private sector. So with that, I would like to hand over to Ibu Dewi, CEO of Online Pajak, to share more about some of these benefits in her presentation.
Thank you so much, Iswari. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu yang terhormat. Senang sekali kita bisa berada pagi hari ini untuk membicarakan lebih jauh lagi bagaimana kita melakukan tax digitalization in Indonesia. And it's also like a very humble and a very honest kind of experience for me myself to be here with all the esteemed speakers and the panelists. Thank you so much for Pak Febrio, Pak Suryo, Professor J, and of course our wonderful hosts, Kesoms and Iswari. And we'll be looking forward for exchanging kind of more of informations with Pak Iwan, Bu Oka, and more discussion with all the esteemed participants as well. Thank you so much. Okay, I think it's a very interesting discussion that we had, and listening to Professor Jay as well, that something that intrigued me during your presentations, as well as answering some of the questions, though, that don't repeat, don't use, don't ask the information that's not needed, right? And make it like a burdenless to the taxpayers. And today I'll be like presenting more from the angle of a different kind of a nuance and a different perspective coming from a taxpayers, because Online Pajak exists because of Dirjen Pajak. We do carry out your mission, we do carry out your visions, how to increase the penetrations of taxpayers in Indonesia, and then also like helping the government in regards of through your tax reform, increasing or the percentage from 12% as what being highlighted by Iswari, then at least go above and beyond of a threshold of a 15% onward. And that's why the subtitle over there that I'm putting here is really like a real-time shift. The shift is really happening now. And I think I'm very optimistic person and a very positive person. Yeah, we don't like the pandemic that we are having now, right? But I think the pandemic is also like opening up lots of opportunity. And I think in that regard, it's helping the tax digitalizations going forward is also easier. This is some of a study and the insight that we are getting coming from close to 2 million of taxpayers that has been using Online Pajak platform. We understand that during the pandemic, all of a sudden, I mean, like in the past, they already know like a digitalization is really needed, right? But they always like a push back a little bit. Oh, it might be not now because it's not really like a priority yet, right? But then during the pandemic, then they realize whether they like it or not, they really have to embrace it. And we also find out like some of a structural kind of weaknesses and all the taxpayers, and especially in the big enterprises company though, that their process and that their structure are not robust enough to do it like in the variable kind of manners, right? That's why But then also at the same time, then from an online project perspective, we see it like an opportunity for us and how we can help out on that kind of a perspective. For example, like moving from a capex into opex, right? How can we make like our platform becoming like a so democratized, like everybody can use it? Yeah, it's no longer like gonna be like a very expensive kind of a system that they have to procure and then like a long time to deploy it and adopt it, but right away in the real time kind of manner, right away they can use it. And also other than that is also the opportunity that we are seeing as well, that we can help all the wajib pajak, the taxpayers, to increase their automatizations within their company. Yeah. And the last but not the least is also like putting on the end-to-end kind of a platform, as well as changing the behavior and giving them more insight of what's really like a matter for them. Because again, this pandemic is also like opening up lots of doors of opportunity. Like the customer that used to be there might not be there anymore, and they need to start understanding who are their real customers, right? Because at the end of the day, when we want to talk about like a bigger objective of economic growth and then the business growth for our taxpayers, we have to address some of those issues, right? Next slide, please. Yeah. So in the summary, a couple of things that moving into the digitalization a little bit like difficult for all of them is there's too many tools. It's not integrated, too many silos, or somebody taking decision. For example, even like from a tax perspective, right? The one that are doing the calculation of a tax and doing the administration of a tax, and the one that are doing the payment and also the filings. And because at the end of the day, they have to be ready for any audit in the futures, right? Then yeah, too many kind of a silo happening. And last but not the least, the data point is really like a tremendous. It's really the top three things that are holding back the taxpayers to move and embrace the tax digitalizations as well. So, okay, next slide, please. So with that, from an online pajak perspective, whatever services that we are giving to our taxpayers, so we always anchor ourselves into this 4 pillar. How can we help all the taxpayer giving more insight of their customer? How can we support their agile kind of a business strategy to be implemented, in which like related to the other 2 pillars, which is like automating their business process internally and streamlining. Yeah, streamlining, if that can be done in the point of a transaction. I'd like to quote a little bit of Pak Iwan's directions though on the tax just happened. Yeah, so we try to like bring that into the execution as well, on how to bring the implementations of a tax is really happening at the point of a transaction. That's eventually it's gonna be like touching a little bit more of their operations, the company kind of operation. Last but not the least, of course, like when they are able to do the automation, they are able to do the integration, and of course their business could be like optimized and reduce the cost a little bit. And during this time, reducing the cost a bit through the operation is gonna be like marvelous as well. So yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah, so working together with the DJP, and then especially in this regard, we are proud to like serving all the taxpayer in Indonesia, especially in the cascaded down kind of actions, becoming like a simplified, like their tax compliance. Iswari, you touch a little bit on the API as well, right? But other than the API, the one that we are supporting the corporate kind of taxpayers, but then we are also supporting like a very micro kind of businesses, even like the homebody kind of businesses, which is really mushrooming in the last few years in Indonesia, especially with the millennials kind of a group of peoples, right? So those are the people, the taxpayers that has been using our platform. I think it's close out of 2 million taxpayer users. We do have like close to 1.6 million kind of a micro businesses and the individual. This is the part that they are using our platform a little bit as well as a part of their, because they don't really need like an income statement. They don't need like a profit and loss kind of a statement, right? What they need, they just fulfill their tax compliance. Any transaction that they do, they just right away in the real time, they just submitting on how much that they need to pay to the governments then, yeah. So basically we try to simplify the tax compliance to the taxpayers. And then apart from that, remember like one of the whole pack is also like a many silos within the organizations as well, right? And with the platform that we are providing, we try to sort of like putting the integrated kind of a model for everybody, from a tax department to a finance department, even to a HR department, so on and so forth. So they can see like a one platform, so they can like collaborate and understand that all the compliance that needed is already like being executed as well, very, very well, right? And then of course, when they are complies to the tax, then the almost reduce the risk of being non-compliance as well, right? And the other three, other three elements, this is more towards like to the taxpayers. When we help them to make, for example, like the collections of a VAT, the e-factors and everything happening at the real time, it does help them to collect their money faster as well, Tom. Yeah, and also like helping them to like report to the tax department in the timely manner as well, without doing all the adjustments, so on and so forth, right? And of course, the other two pillars is easy integrations, secures, and whenever that they are. In the last 6 months, I think we are helping quite a numbers of customers, quite a lot, yeah, moving from a desktop base to the cloud base, because that's really like what's needed, especially during this pandemic time. Everybody's still working, everybody's still doing the hybrid or a work from home kind of a model, right? Yeah, so then the work shouldn't be like having an obstacle or a hindrance to be like completed wherever the person is then, yeah. Okay, lastly, then on my slide, on point as well on the 10 minutes kind of a time allocations, my next slide, please. Yep. So hopefully with the platform that we are providing, the services that we are providing, and then giving all the esteemed participants and the panelists here, we are really keen to support the government on your tax digital transformation by providing a very easy and a transparent, but of course, since we are in the digital and the cloud kind of era, it has to be secure. It has to be secure. It's very key element. But then to the taxpayers, with all the integration as well, we have to be able to support their business growth. Yeah. And if the business is growing, then of course the economic is coming back, and hopefully coming into our Q3 fiscal year this year is gonna be like a rebound, because Professor Rosengard, you are not in Jakarta yet, but you could see like the traffic is almost coming back to the normal, and we are really hoping by this Q3 and the Q4 we should be able to like riding on the momentum and coming back to the very good kind of a growth rate as well, Stan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi, and thank you for that presentation, which I think really also reiterates Professor Jay's key point earlier on how to keep the customers and the taxpayers front and center. So that was really insightful to hear how the platform is also helping to reduce the hassles and ultimately increase tax compliance. I would now like to invite Pak Iwan, who is ICT Director at Directorate General Pajak, to share about the key steps that have been taken by Pajak, as well as the continued innovation as we look forward. Pak Iwan, please.
Thank you, Iswari. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. So it's being an honor to be here to conduct the presentations in front of you guys. And then after listening to Bu Dewi's presentations, I think that most of our digital transformations has been explained by Bu Dewi. Thank you, Bu Dewi. So my part is only to complete the rest. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to presentations about our digital journey, especially in IT. So before 2002, we have a decentralized system, and then since 2002, we are trying to initiate the centralized system, and then trying to move to the digital ecosystem. So at that time, we introduced the MP3 payment system, and then we tried to also to introduce a third party. We call it application service providers, and try to use the electronic for the return. We call it electronic SPT. And then the submission is not online, but using the local applications in every single KPP. And then 2007, so we also improve our payment systems. Now we try to move to the MPN, we call it, and then electronic registrations. Before we have to attend, or the taxpayer has to attend to the tax officers, to tax office when they have to register. But since 2007, we tried to move to a digital channel. And then 2012, we tried to introduce the e-filing and online directly to the centralized system. 2014, we introduced the new billing systems, the more robust billing system. And then 2015, we tried to move to the data. We tried to use how to gather the data, how to be a data-driven organization. And since 2018, we also introduce the several programs, not only VAT invoices, we moved to the other invoices like withholding taxes, automatic exchange information, and CBCR. And mostly of them is how we collect the data. We use the technology, we use the digital technology to collect the right data. And in 2019, now we would like to also to move to service, and then we empower the third party, we call it application service provider, to be our partner. Before, since 2002, we just think that ISP is only our forwarder, right? And then since 2015, we changed our mindset. We changed our mindset. The ISP or the third party or the private sector has to be our strategic partners. So that's why in 2015, we introduced what we called the governmentpreneurship program. We call it government entrepreneurship. It means that the policy in IT that can create the new entrepreneur collaborate with us to serve the taxpayers in a better way. So we call it governmentpreneurship. And then we changed the models. Before, the ISP is only for the forwarders, but since 2015, almost our services will be delivered by the ISP. And we use ISP as our strategic partner. So you can see that, like Bu Mulyasari told before, explained before, that the significantly of the tax services is very improved. And right now we are struggling in managing our IT. And then, of course, like Ajay said, that now we are facing the core tax system, the new core tax system, the very sophisticated core tax system, and then with the new technology and with new perspective. And then next slide. So in delivering our services, in delivering IT services, so we follow the business directions from the visions. The GP vision is we would like to be becoming the best institution for collecting state revenue to ensure the state sovereignty and independence. And we have a 4 strategy. First, we would like to collect based on the high voluntary and very fair enforcement. So it means that we would like to treat fairly for the whole taxpayers, not the same treatment, but the fair treatment. The modern technology-based services to facilitate the fulfillment of the tax obligations. And of course, in the third is we would like to also improve our integration, our integrity, tax integrity, competence and professionalism. And then last but not least, we also would like to increase the compensation for our staff. So that's a 4 strategy. And then we also follow the business directions in developing our business process redesign. that Pak Suryo has mentioned before. First is, of course, we'd like to establish the streamlined process. The second one is, no, we also want to reduce the pain point of the taxpayers, because in the past time, the pain point of the taxpayers should be a very, very big problem to comply. And then third is, like your suggestions, open and integrated system using APIs, of course, because we know that right now the Superman is dead. Now, the only way is we have to collaborate. Now the new Avengers comes. So we'd like to have a new Avengers for this country as well. And then the fourth is data and knowledge driven. Our decisions has to be based on the data, knowledge, and information, of course. And then digitized and automated process, less human interventions means, of course, it's using the data as well. And then the sixth is enterprise-wide integrated view of taxpayers. It means that the taxpayers knows what we knows. We knows the taxpayers that we knows. That's the idiom. And then, of course, we'd like also to have a prudent and accountable process. And all decisions should be on a risk-based compliance approach. Not everybody has to be audited, but we audit only for the very risk profile. And then the last is we also want to use omni-channels or multi-channels and borderless services to serve the taxpayers. Like Dewi said that our ultimate goals in the IT system is we would like to establish what we call it a natural digital tax system. Bu Dewi said that the tax just happened. In Indonesia is bayar pajak ya gitu aja. So it means that the taxpayers it's very easy to comply with the taxations. It has to be the taxation obligation of the tax. It will be embedded on daily behavior, on daily transaction. So that's what we would like to achieve. Tax assessment or the natural digital system. So that's why we collaborate with third party and we collaborate with the other parties, including bank, or not only ISP, including third party, as long as we can reach the taxpayers to make them easier. So in reaching our goals, so there are three strategic bends that we'd like to follow. First, since we doing in 2002, we have a program is migrating to the digital ecosystem. So we need to migrate all the physical to be a digital. And the second one, we also would like to have a integrated and interactive system. So we would like to serve the taxpayer wherever they have and whatever they test. And so that's why we're using the third party like online pajak, the ASP, to serve the taxpayers. We give the opportunity to the ASP to be our strategic partner to serve the taxpayers better. And the third is we'd like also to establish the digital auto-regulated system. It means that less human interventions embedded with the data integrity, and the data has to be embedded also with the identity. So with these three kind of them, so there's so many measures that we have been developing since we shifting the taxpayer inquiries and reporting activities to the digital channel like e-filing, e-billing, e-reporting, e-inquiries, and etc. And the second one is we also like to have a strengthening data validation to make sure that information generated by system is executable. And the third is we would like also establish the natural system to capture transaction of the taxpayers, such as electronic VAT, electronic withholding tax, and pre-populated, and so on. And maybe there will be another system that we will develop, such as CSR maybe, CRS maybe, or electronic stamp duty and so far, and so on. And then the fourth is we would like also now try to implementing the risk-based enforcement approaches. We call it CRM. We have a tools named compliance management system, so we can identify whether the taxpayers has a high risk or the low risk. So the purpose is we can allocate our resources more efficiently to address only the risk, the high risk one. And then the fifth is we also have a program that we call it the CCC, or click or counter, mean that our services will be prioritized on the click first, less human intervention. So, and then if there's still questions, so they can call, and then if there's several cases that cannot be answered by the call or click, so they can visit the counter. And then also we try to interact with taxpayers, not only audit, and also we develop the taxpayer accounting system. And for ourselves, we know also establishing the flexible working space. So now, as you know, that Ministry of Finance also has this program. So all staff can work everywhere, but not to be bring your own device. We still provide the device, but the concept is a very flexible working space. But maybe in the later we also would like to use the mobile mobile device. And then this the second one, we call it the governorship programs. We would like to establish interactive integrated system. We establish open IT system that capable to interact with the other systems. You suggest with the APIs, right? So we also use the APIs here. And then we just only manage the middleware, manage the security. So we introduced this program because we realize that to reduce the pinpoint of the taxpayers, we have to more customer-centric. We don't have a capability enough to identify the very specific customer-centric, so that's why we need the help. We need to collaborate with the third party that they already know the pain point because they are taxpayers as well. And then we also open the collaborations to the ISP, to the bank, to communication. So hopefully the target is before we only have several channels, but maybe if we succeed to provide this program, so we hope that there will be 1,000 or maybe million channels for the taxpayers to interact with the digitax system through the third party. And then that will be more convenience to the taxpayers. And then the third is we also would like to collaborate with our institutions. We provide the tax clearance information because we know that the obligations of the citizen is to pay the tax, and then the right can be delivered after they file their obligation. So that's why we now collaborate with the government, other government institutions. Before they give the service to the citizen, they connect to us first to make sure that the taxpayer's service has been fulfilling their obligation, their tax obligation. If they hasn't, so the services will not be delivered. So that's the point. So now maybe more than 100 government systems has been joining this program. And the third one is we also like to less human intervention. We also like to have a system that can be auto-regulated ecosystem. First, now we have been success to initiate the digital ID. We call it Kartini, and also you mentioned in your report. The purpose is we realized that we don't have a very strong common ID. We have the very not common data. So that's why we need to have a single ID to collaborate all the data in order to be analyzed. And then the second one, we also make sure the data flows will be flowed to the Digitex systems with the very verified identity, and then to make sure the data integrity is maintained through built-in continuous feedback loops. So now, not only to the services, but also to the data, we also collaborate with other institutions to build the data warehouse, or the data collection, or the data collection to make sure the data can be analyzed further. And then the third one is, of course, we would like to increase the transparency. Taxpayer has visibility to what Digito knows. It is easy to say, but hard to do, right? Because we have to make sure that the data that we have is very, very clear enough in order not to get a complaint from the taxpayers. So we are working on this way right now. And then the fourth is establishing the system that based on the right data and the right event base that can drive taxpayer to fulfill this entitlement properly with less human intervention. So this is the three themes that we follow, as our baseline in developing our digital system in the future. So hopefully it can be understood. And then I also believe that these three themes can bring the Indonesian tax administration system will be more convenience, will be more customer-centric to the taxpayers. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Pak Iwan. Thank you so much for that presentation. And as I invite our attendees who are with us today to also share any questions for the panelists, we'll be inviting back Professor J, Pak Iwan, as well as Ibu Dewi to answer any questions that might be there. I'm going to try to see if I can summarize, some of the three key takeaways from this session as the questions come in. So please do share them in the Q&A box. The first point that really stood out for me, and I think was repeated by many of our esteemed speakers today, is that the value of digitization or digitalization has never been clearer than now. And the crisis, the pandemic has been a wake-up call for governments around the world in terms of utilization and leveraging the benefits of digitalization. And in the context of tax, this is important from both perspectives, both from the administrators who are collecting tax, as well as helping taxpayers make these tax compliance easier. Second point was noted by Ibu Dewi, and she has talked a little bit about how the focus on customer centricity, which is a role that has been played by the private sector, is already starting to pay off when it comes to onboarding taxpayers. And as we proceed and the process of tax digitalization progresses, the use of these tax platforms for tax payment increases, it is also important to keep a view on security, as that's going to be very critical in building continued trust on the end of taxpayers. And last but not least, Pak Iwan noted the importance of efficiency, and focusing on what matters. So Pajak has already done this by adopting new technology, through partnerships with the private sector. And what remains to be done and is an ongoing effort is revisiting some of the processes on the back end, and also ensuring that they are consistent with the technology improvements that are also being made, so that the full benefits can be reaped. So with that, I'd just like to see if there are any questions that have come in. any questions? Perhaps I would ask if the Pajak team, who are all in one room, could start us off with any questions. So while we wait for colleagues from the Pajak team, perhaps I could just ask a question. You know, it's a broad question to the panelists that we have here, and looking forward, and in the objective of sort of setting targets for this process of tax reform as well as specifically tax digitalization. You know, what are three sort of commitments or the top commitments that you think the government of Indonesia and Indonesia could benefit from? Professor Jay, would you like to start us off?
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Sure. So my question was really, in terms of looking forward, what are the top three things that the government of Indonesia could prioritize in this process of tax reform and tax digitalization?
Well, I think the general strategy outlined by Pak Iwan is a good strategy, and it's been consistent over 2 decades. So staying the course would be one. Stick with the strategy that's been articulated. It takes time, it takes patience. Number two, it's a little bit contradictory, but also be agile and adapt to changing circumstances. And the third is a very real world challenge, and that is, how do you balance the urgent need for revenue now versus preparing a strong foundation for a robust tax system in the long term? I know there are tremendous pressures to increase revenue. There are often very ambitious targets, and what sometimes happens is that long-term reform is undermined by the pressure to generate revenue immediately. So again, trying to find a healthy balance between meeting immediate needs of the government versus laying a strong foundation for the future. The third one is probably the most difficult.
Thank you, Professor Jay. I'm noting that we do have a very specialized group in our audience today that also includes, many development partners that are actively working on the broader issue of tax reform in Indonesia. And I also wanted to give the opportunity to colleagues, Pak Iwan's team, the Pajak team, as well as the Fiscal Policy Agency team, to talk about where some of the key challenges are, and where collectively, through partnership with development actors and the private sector, these challenges could be addressed. So if there are any comments on where some of the key challenges as we look forward are, and perhaps some responses from our colleagues from the many development programs to share about how they're working with the government of Indonesia. Thank you.
Sorry, this is Kesom. I thought, as you asked this question, it would be really insightful to hear how, if there have been any trade-offs when prioritizing user centricity in tax digitalization. And I ask this because, traditionally tax is something that everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but, in mainstream media, it seems that it's something that everyone tries to evade. You run away from it. So really approaching it from, not just compliance, but something that's good to do, something that's a responsibility, something that's quite intuitive. Whether as a micro entrepreneur, it's just, a $5 value contribution a month or every quarter, making that quite seamless. Just wanted to know how the government of Indonesia is broadly approaching user centricity and the advocacy around tax digitalization opportunities, not just for the government, but also in terms of, for the country and the people.
Is that a question that perhaps Ibu Dewi you'd like to take? Because I know that Online Pajak has really focused on this issue of design and addressing or meeting customer needs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kaysam, for questions as well. And I try to answer it not from policy, because that's not really like what we are good at. What we are good at is more like coming from taxpayers, and also what are the challenges that are being faced by them, right? And I think Professor Jay already highlighted a little bit in the beginning of the presentations as well. It's not really about the technology. The technology, yes, we can enable and can answer some of the challenges, but then the bigger question is more from the policy perspective though, because what we've been hearing, and also the feedback that we are getting coming from our taxpayers kind of users, they said it's not, they do not want to pay the pajak, but they said, like for example, like a certain business, like in the distribution here, right? I just pick up like a couple of scenario. In the distribution business, they are really in a very cutthroat business. Their margin, it could be like a very little single digit. Yes, but then if you are below than a 4.8 million rupiah, then you just pay like a 0.5%, right? But then even with the 0.5% for them is also like a quite significant, because that's based on the revenue, not based on their income, while they are only making like a 2-3% kind of a margin only though. That's the number one. It's not really like they do not want to pay the pajak, but it's really like how to get like a very, I understand this is like a much more complex than what I say. I understand it's gonna be like a lots of a thing at the back end, but maybe it will give a little bit of a perspective as well, and the nuance coming from the taxpayers, right? And then the second one, what they are worried, yes, I want to be compliant, but then if my neighbor is not compliant, right, then I am in a very disadvantaged kind of a positions, right? And I think this is like again a bigger kind of and a more complex kind of a situation, and how we from the government perspective have to ensure that we equalize the competitions, not because by evading the tax, but really all the processes that are being enabled in the market is then everybody can compete healthily then in the same equal kind of a ground. Because if the neighbor can still do all those magic stuff, as a magicians, event here, event there, then while they are the one that being compliant, then it's kind of like we are penalize the person who is compliant. Yeah, I think it's more like coming back to the policy, and of course, I think a full confidence with all the initiative that has been run by DGP with under the leadership of Pak Iwan. I think the process is gonna be like a very seamless, and that's really like the one that are being appreciated by the taxpayers as well. So,
maybe I can add.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We also have for the small and medium enterprises, we also have a program named BDS, Business Development Services. We collaborate with the third party, especially as a state-owned enterprise, because they have so many community, small and medium enterprise. We just teach them how to like a bookkeeping, how to pay the tax, and we just give them with collaboration with the state-owned enterprise how to pay the tax properly, not only pay, but how to deal with the financial services as well. And then we also collaborate with the state-owned enterprise that we provide the needs that they want to have, and we also listen what they want in terms of the policy. So the program is now is still going on. So we also want to challenge Bu Dewi and then the ISP. So please make the tax just happen, right? Make the tax just happen. It means that I would like to challenge the ISP how you can make like a program that can embed to the small and medium enterprises businesses, so they even don't realize that they already have fulfilled their tax obligations. So I just want to make sure that ISP can do that. That's my additional answer. Thank you.
If I could add just a little bit to the two previous comments, I mean, I think all those points are very well taken. And when you talk to taxpayers, two of the most common reasons they give for not paying taxes, and especially medium and small, one, Ibu Dewi said, well, it's just not fair. You know, I'm at a competitive disadvantage, you know, if my competitor's not paying taxes and I am. And it's worse than that, you know, aku bodoh bayar pajak. Yeah, I mean, why did I pay? I mean, that was dumb. But the other thing that's well beyond the authority of pajak is value for money. You know, you have to show good use of the money from the government. People think they're throwing it away, they could use better use, or it's going to disappear. So a broader public sector perspective, as I said, beyond pajak, it's showing that the government is using the money effectively, carefully, judiciously. So it's fairness, as Pa Iwan and Ibu Dewi said, but it's also the idea of value for my hard-earned money that I'm now giving to the government. You're transferring purchasing power, and you want to show that the government can make good use of these very scarce resources.
Thank you, Professor Jay. And I think, you know, that's sort of a good segue to also invite our final speaker for today, who will, from her role at the Center for Revenue Policy at BKF, the Fiscal Policy Agency, you know, can also give us a view on this broader tax reform and this issue of, you know, broader use of tax and value for money, as you've mentioned. So without further ado, I would like to invite Ibu Oka Kusumawardani from BKF, please.
Thank you, Iswari. I think, yeah, it's been a pleasure being with all of you today, I think, and to listen to the very interesting presentations by our honorable guest, Professor Jay, as well as from the esteemed colleagues with MOF, Pak Febrio, Pak Suryo, and also Pak Iwan, as well as colleagues from the Better Than Cash Alliance, who has prioritized this very important research on tax digitizations. Well, as our colleagues working in Indonesia well know, this is not a priority for the Minister of Finance, and we are thankful for the partnership and also the support from all colleagues from the international development community, as well as our academic partners. The 10 success factors are indeed a useful guide and framework for designing successful digital tax systems. And we are very proud that the Indonesian tax office experience in digitalizations and the analysis and lessons of that journey have played an important role in developing this guide as well. As highlighted earlier, one of the key reasons for Indonesia's digitalization success has been the authorities' ability to partner with the private sector to reduce ICT development costs and enable taxpayers to also access value-added services. And this, in particular, helps to support our goal of mobilizing greater domestic resources. And on this note, I would like to also thank you, Ibu Dewi, for sharing on online pajak's collaborative partnership with the Indonesian Tax Authority. I would like to conclude perhaps with 3 points on the importance of the digitalizations in relations to our strategy. and also ongoing work on broader tax reform. Well, the first, that digitalization reduces bureaucracy, for sure, and also improves the process business to be more effective and efficient. And those lowering also the compliance costs for the taxpayer. And then the second, in order to build a sustainable environment for the digitalization initiatives, articulating and also building support for a long-term tax digitalization strategy is also a crucial part. And finally, with the digitalizations, because it helps also collections of data needed for matching, data matching, and to support optimizations of the tax potential, I think it is important also to have alignment between the tax digitalizations in the context of tax administration reforms with the tax policy reforms. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all once again for joining us and contributing to this important agenda. I encourage you to share the Indonesian case study and the broader research when it is launched later this month. And with that, this event comes to an official close. I wish everyone a good rest of the day, and also thank you again. Good day. Hello, Isuri.
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu Oka. With that, I think we can close off this session. We thank everyone for their participation, their interest, and feel free to reach out to us at the Better Than Cash Alliance with any additional questions that we could address following today. Thank you very much.